Rod Willis, welcome to Australian Musician.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. Good
Uh,
being here with you.
yeah, we're talking to you today about this book, Ringside, which
Oh,
talks
where'd
about,
you get that from?
yeah, about your time in the music industry and more importantly, managing Cold Chisel. Has writing a book always been in the back of your mind, or was it a more recent notion?
Um, no, it was way back when I was still working with Cold Chisel. I remember talking to Don and saying, I'm thinking about maybe writing a book about my life. And but obviously it's going to include Cold Chisel, and the early years when I was in England and America and all of that kind of thing. But the question was with Don was like, I'm not quite sure, who do you reckon I should get to author it? And Don turned to me and said, mate, there is only one person. I'm waiting for the person, and that is you. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, no, it's got to be in your voice. Okay. Okay. So I thought, where do I start? So I wrote down, I wrote down 1947, and that's where I started from. And I was lucky that I had diaries, mainly business diaries, but I also managed to keep all my old notepads, and they were most helpful, except that I'd never written on top of the page, 19th of 8th, August, 84 or something. I then had to sort of decipher, now what does this, oh, okay, which, okay. So then I'd write that, and they all helped. And then, writing it in a chronological form, I then started to fill in the obvious ones that I remembered. Um, and as I wrote it, and every so often I would talk to somebody, either from the band or from or people that worked in the crew and all that, and that quite often they would just sort of say, "Oh, do you remember the time this happened and whatever?" And I go, "Yeah, that's a good thing." And some of those things made the book. Some of them didn't make them. My whole idea was not just to do a chronological thing on Cold Chisel and that kind of thing. It was I wanted to write what I thought would be entertaining for people. I wanted to have a bit of a broader thing than just sort of like, for the train spotter, I wanted to know whether Jimmy was wearing a red plaid shirt or was it a blue plaid shirt, and so that's what I hope to do. So I I tried to include as all these anecdotes and little vignettes and vignettes on what happened along the way, and hopefully from response from that I've had, people seem to like it.
Yeah, it was interesting for me. I was about a third of the way into the book, and Cold Chisel still hadn't been mentioned. Um, but I,
Yeah.
but I was still thoroughly entertained because you were quite the larrikin in your youth.
I
Do you reckon that larrikinism come in handy in your business dealings along the way?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah. I mean, those early years, I was very lucky. Actually, the publisher, when I first did the deal with the publisher, they sort of said to me, "Oh, the early stuff prior to Cold Chisel. Is there any chance you could condense it a bit?" And I went, I was like going, "Yeah, hey, I'm grateful I've got a deal here. So yeah, I can do that." They didn't say get rid of it by any stretch of the imagination. They just said condense it. Anyway, Jeff Apter, who I got to edit the book, and in fact was a man that orchestrated the deal. To be brutally honest, he was the one that I rang him about just publishers actually, and he said, "Why don't you just send me something and I'll just have a read?" I think he was just testing out this, this manager that thinks he can write a book, kind of thing. And so I sent him something, and then he rang me back the next day and he said, actually, I really like what you've done. Do you mind if I spruik it to some publishers? And I went, hey, mate, go right ahead, because I don't know where I'm going in that respect. And when he found out that they were looking at condensing it, he basically went to them and said, hey, forget about it. He said, if you don't have this story in full, the second part, the money ball, so to speak, it doesn't make sense. It's this guy, how he came about, what he learned overseas, and that kind of thing. And I'm ever grateful to the publishers that they did. And I think it makes a better story.
Yeah.
A lot of us older gentlemen, we can remember all of those days, going to see I was very lucky. I went there when I was 18 years of age, and within a couple of months, I was at Southport Floral Hall watching the Cream, and then watching Shotgun Express, and then watching Pink Floyd, and then watching John Mayall, and countless other people, and then finding a band up there that got a record contract, and I was down in London, and all that sort of story that I think
Certainly.
sets up what happened with me eventually. I mean, eventually coming back to Australia.
Yeah, you certainly had your run in with some famous people. In fact, one of your mates was the original Milky Bar Kid.
Yes, he was. And in fact, if you have to trace something right back to where I really started I moved to a suburb called Roseville. It's on the northern suburbs of Sydney. And there was a family that lived across the road. And they were kind of like, like a bit of Bee Gees. They were all sort of always appearing on those teenage shows or kids shows or whatever you want to call them at that time. They could play guitar, they could sing, that kind of thing. And the eldest brother, when the surf craze was kind of still going when I went there, and he was in a band called the Stompedes, and they used to play up at a local Masonic hall, like they have. And I sort of used to tag along, and because there was lots of girls there, I of course used to make sure that I was holding onto the microphone, hey, I'm the roadie, like that kind of thing. And and that was kind of my introduction. And then of course the beat thing happened. The Beatles came. I wagged school, went to see the Beatles at the airport, and then that kind of thing. So things were really starting to change. But that guy, he then had the band morphed into a kind of a beat band, influenced by Beatles, Stones, that kind of thing. And then I started hanging out in the inner city where all those sort of bands would play. And those sort of early days, where the Easy Beats would be playing down the road, or the Throb, or all these sort of bands, or Love Ones, Purple Hearts, one of my all-time favorites, that kind of thing. So I became this music mad kid, I guess, and that's kind of how it started, and I guess that's what fed that appetite. That I wanted to be part of the real thing, not going down to the newsagents at Wynyard Station and getting out of date by a month's music, NMEs and melody makers and that kind of thing, and sort of opening them up and going, oh wow, look who's played at the marquee. I wanted to basically be at the marquee, and that's what drove me, I guess, to sort of at 18 years of age to sort of, I'd been working in Darwin with my stepfather, and I'd made £550, and I decided that, well, I could buy a car or I could go to England. So I approached my parents, And weirdly enough, they said, yeah. I think they thought I was going there for 2 years. And I probably thought I was going there for 2 years, but I ended up going there for 11 years and, carving out a career, which took me, from the north of England down to London, then to Europe, and then eventually a lot of time in America.
Yeah. You was it your father or stepfather that was in the entertainment business, and through him
That was my father.
You met
My father. Yeah,
Alfred Hitchcock.
yeah. Well, that was one of the. Well, it was funny things about that period. That was when he worked at MGM, so I was pretty young then, and I think we had been, because he worked at MGM, we could get free tickets to the cinema because I think it was before television started, yeah. And so we often used to go in there, and the big theaters were the big thing, and my mother had said, oh, we've got to go and meet your dad down at MGM offices. And I remember standing down the bottom of the I think it was the stairs, yeah, it was stairs, yeah. And there was a mob of people at the top of the stairs, and one of them was my father, and there was this kind of rotund gentleman with him, and as they came down, and then when he got to the bottom, he introduced Alfred Hitchcock to my mother and then myself, and that was the first time I guess I had ever met somebody that famous as such. But as time went on, he went and joined Channel 7. He became the publicity manager at Channel 7, so it was like the introduction. And at that time, a lot of stars would come down to do those TV programs that were on, at that time, Digby Wolf and all those kind of things. And so I was often would go to the airport with him, and then I'd meet those people. And also at the same time, they had those kids programs like the Captain Fortune show and that. And of course, we would be invited in there to be part of the audience as such, the stunt audience, or the dummy audience, and we often would be, oh, can you bring the kids who are in? We need them, them to be in the audience, and so I got introduced at a very early age to sort of people, famous people as such, and I guess then when the Beatles came, my father had could get tickets. And my sister and I, and I think her girlfriend, I think it might have been, went there when the Beatles played at the Sydney Stadium, and we were in row 7. And all the people around us were all industry types, older people, like we go, oh, let's see what this is like. There's, these bloody Beatles, funny looking blokes, And so I can always remember. As soon as the Beatles came on, the place just went, it was just white noise. And everybody stood up, and like there was the 3 of us standing up in this, amongst all these people that were just sitting there with suits on going, what the hell is going on here? Even Johnny Ray didn't get this sort of reaction, So, that's kind of.
Yeah, well, that's
I got sort of, I guess, into. Maybe, that's how I got sort of like become a music mad kid,
Yeah. So let's fast forward to Cold Chisel. You got back from England.
Yeah.
What were the main elements in Cold Chisel that you saw the first time you saw them perform?
Well, the first time I saw them perform was at a club in Chinatown called Checkers, and it was it actually had been quite a big club back in the sort of 50s, where they'd had Shirley Bassey and those kind of people. I'm trying to remember who else was, let's say Harry Belafonte or something like that, but it was quite a leading nightclub as such. But its days had diminished as such, and it was, it was in Chinatown. I always remember it sort of like used to have this sort of permeating, a smell of Chinese food, but, my brother had told me about the band, and as I've said to a number of interviewers, I said, what's the name of the band? And he said, Cold Chisel. And I thought, oh my God, that's a dreadful name. Anyway, I said, I'll go down. He said, look, nobody wants to know about them. he said, I can't believe it. They're just a great band, you know, they can really play. I mean, I learned that there was a lot of people that did like them, but, you know, there was nobody falling over themselves to sign them. And I went down there and this motley crew walked on stage. The singer immediately turned his back to the audience. And I thought, well, that's a good start. But really what kicked in was suddenly Don Walker, the keyboard player, started the sort of like a Jerry Lee Lewis. I can't remember the song, you know, what it was. Was it, whether it was Home and Broken Hearted? I don't know at that time. Don might remember what they were playing. But, you know, suddenly this rhythm section kicked in and I went, wow, these guys can really play. But then when Jimmy kicked in, it was a voice that I went, it was like, this is just not what I was expecting. I wasn't expecting that at all. I was kind of used to blues shouters and whatever, but it had a different sort of style to it. It reminded me of when I first heard Stevie Winwood sing, you know, there's this unique sound, a unique style or sound, you know, and, you know, I just was blown away. But also, one of the things that at that time they were peppering their repertoire with a couple of, and Don would probably remember what the songs were. I think Daskazine might have been one of them, and then maybe Home and Broken Hearted. I'm just not quite sure. But those sort of songs stood out with your Roadhouse Blues and the kind of things that they would play an odd Hendrix number or a stuff. And I kind of heard it that, and I'd been back for, you know, a few weeks or a month or whatever it would have been, you know, and I'd been trolling around looking at different bands. So I had a little bit of comparison. It wasn't like they were the first band that I saw. And it's funny because I saw so many of the bands, or many bands, and I always thought, oh, they're all influenced by Free. You know, well, I love Free. Don't get me wrong, I loved them, but it all seemed to be kind of that kind of feel to it. Probably unfair because there were probably other bands out there that weren't like that, you know. And I learned fairly quickly they weren't, you know. I mean, one standout band at that time was Dragon, who I just thought were just sensational, you know, great pop songs, you know. But this was like a kind of got a dirty rock and roll band, you know. But those few songs that were originals to me stood out. Now, was it the lyrics? I doubt it because I was never a big lyrics man. I think it was just the style of the song, the feel of the songs. There was something different about them. And when I had a meeting with them at the excuse me, at the Plaza Hotel in this sort of kind of dingy room, I hate to use the word dingy again, but it was kind of like that. It had one of those sort of brown TV sets, you know, like the old, I don't know what that was made out of, you know, plastic, I suppose, you know, and it had the TV a coat hanger in the aerial, you know, like, and there was a couple of, I always remember there was like a half peeled orange sitting on top of it. And it was just wasn't like the kind of a salubrious place you would sort of want to be in. I was like, you know, I always used to say to Don, I don't know, you might like these sort of places, but it's not for me, you know. And I think, you know, Don liked that kind of environment because he drew from that environment, very much so. He drew from it. And of course, without that environment, a lot of those songs wouldn't be what they were or what they become, you know, became rather. And I wasn't quite sure when I was doing my spiel to the band, you know, everybody, Don was hanging on every word, and you know, Jimmy's just sitting there looking at me as if I'm thinking to myself, what's he think? Is he a wanker, this guy, or what? And I assume that they'd been told so many times by people that they were going to be, oh mate, you're the greatest band in the world. I'm going to make it superstars and whatever. And I did sort of use those sort of cliches, you know, and I actually didn't think that that maybe I'd got the gig. And Don rang me the next day and said, mate, you've got the gig. So I was like, okay, here we go, sort of thing, you know.
So what was harder, negotiating deals with record and touring companies, or negotiating fights between Jimmy and Steve, or the stubbornness of Don?
Hey, that's a good one. I like that one. Yeah, yes. I don't know. I mean, look, the fights everybody talks about. You know, somebody asked me about something earlier on today. You know, and I said, oh, about the time I came back to my office in Crow's Nest, and the secretary said to me, "Oh, you just missed it all." I go, "What?" And she said, "Oh, Jimmy and Steve were here, and Jimmy was hanging Steve out of the window, you know, and I'm one floor up, right? So it's not like you've like, you know, some window on the ground floor or anything. It was like one flight up. But what the thing was, dealing with the fights, they wouldn't last very long. In fact, the next day, it was always a subject of humor amongst them, never about what orchestrated the fight, more the fact of what actually went on during the there's a hole in the door, you know, those kind of things, you know, something was broken, you know, that which meant that I had to then go cap in hand to the hotel manager and say, look, mate, don't call the police. Yeah, look, you've got a couple of doors that have got sort of holes about yay big, you know, like, oh, so how much does that cost? So I had to pay. And then I'd go out to the van or something and they'd be there laughing their heads off. Never about what had made that argument. More so the fact is that, oh, it's so funny, you know, when I hit you and then you came back and told me this or that, you know. And they never, and those, unfortunately, those fights used to go on. And the poor road crew, they were called into it. They were like my police. I'd go, guys, can you get them into your room and just lock them in? Yeah, okay, we'll try and do that sort of thing. Record companies, yeah, they were pretty sort of, uh, you know, difficult to deal with sometimes, but, you know, they are adults in the room, most of them, so it's a bit easier to deal with it, you know.
So reflecting on the experience of trying to get a US record deal, was there anything you'd look back and do differently, or did the American labels just not really get the band?
Oh, I think that's exactly what happened, you know. I don't think, you know, there's been a bit of conjecture about it, like different people have said, oh, you know, I even heard, you know, oh, the record company was going bust. Well, the record company wasn't going bust. They might, I mean, they were probably all in, you know, they generally were looking for bands, but they didn't get it. Their arrogance, unfortunately, that's the problem. They didn't have, even as much as I tried to jump up and down and explain to them and show them as much as I can, that it took 3 albums to reach this sort of pop side of things. But of course, they just seem to gravitate straight away to the pop side of it. And you try and explain to them that this is a bar band, this is a, you know, picture a bar band, you know. Oh yeah, great. Yeah, we know that. But you know, you know, it's always this. Oh, our people in the field really believe these singles can work. Well, of course they didn't. And we brought the band over to play, and that's fine. But it didn't sort of gel. It's like they were 2 different things. 1 minute it's sort of like pop stuff, and you know, whereas I wanted and I asked and I tried, you know, to get that more rock approach, and that's where it fell apart. The band probably, we in an ideal world we should have and could have and maybe should have thought deeply about you know, spending a lot more time there and going and building from a base. But there's also problems that exist. This band had been around for quite a few years. They'd started in like, what, 74 or 75, that kind of thing. And they'd been on the bones of their ass. So by the time they got to America, they didn't want to be on the bones of their ass again. They had got to that stage where they, you know, and going to America is an expensive exercise. People go on about America like as if you get a couple of plane tickets and you turn up there. I mean, you know, so there was a lot of what's the word for it, security in Australia, and that it's very easy for them to come back here and play to bigger crowds, and you know, and you know, and that kind of distilled, I think, a bit of the frustration that they had. Oh, okay, we can come back here. And there was always intentions to go back to America and whatever. But you know, the second time that, you know, they were doing the same thing. They just went for the pop records as such. And in the end, we just pulled the plug on it, decided that we needed to do something else. And at that same time, that was when there was some interest from Germany, and so I decided that let's just park America to one side, and we'll go and see how Europe. And Europe was a lot more, wanting that sort of band, and seemed to be able to. They didn't also have that pigeonholing thing that they had in America. You know, everything has, it's a supermarket thing. You know, everything has to be in it. You know, there's cornflakes, big difference between cornflakes and Vita Wheat or something, and there's a big difference between Vita Wheat. You know what I'm saying? That, or not Vita Wheat, but you know, and this, I think, confused the Americans. They shifted it to you know, a pop mentality as such. You know, with that's going to work. It's the quick fix in a lot of ways, and you know, and that's very hard when you don't have any muscle. You know, in Australia, I had muscle because we had 3 albums and they'd built, and now they were, you know, they were right at the top at that point in time. So it's a lot easier to walk into a record company and start banging your fist, even though you didn't really need to do that. But, you know, banging your fist on it. You can't really bang your fist on when these people have dealt with the Doors and, you know, blah, blah, and, you know, all these famous bands and whatever. And, you know, you're at their mercy. You know, you really are at their mercy. And yes, things could have been done differently, and things were very frustrating for a bit. I mean, the touring over there wasn't as bad as I think they thought it was. But, you know, I know because I've spoken to, you know, people associated with AC/DC, you know, you don't have the ideal circumstances when you're a band that doesn't have any a name as such in America. You can't go bossing around saying, well, I don't want to be with them. They're not the sort of band, you know, like in things like regard to playing with like Ted Nugent, say, for instance, you know. But what's the ideal band? I mean, you know, I remember, you know, AC/DC, the first time they played there, they played with such a, you know, some of the weirdest billing, you know. But yes, I mean, the American thing was very frustrating. I think if the band had kept going and hadn't broken up in 83, 84, I think there would have been an attempt, and I think we would have got another deal. And I think the band could have, you know, gone back in there, and maybe, you know, maybe they could have done maybe a deal. Do a record with an American producer, you know.
Yeah.
You know, that I think possibly. Like if there'd been a Kevin Shirley around at the time, it would have been because he understood. Kevin understood the band because he had not grown up because he came from South Africa, but Kevin also had spent a lot of time in Sydney, and so he knew what the band and what the band sounded like and what the band should sound like. You know, by just being a person hearing on the radio or being aware of the band in the Australian marketplace, you know.
So when you think back on the whole Chisel journey, what are the most fondest memories?
Oh, I just enjoyed the whole ride. I mean, you know, I was ever grateful that they gave me an opportunity. I didn't have any credentials as such. I mean, my furthest I'd reached in the music industry was being a tour manager for Savoy Brown. I mean, there is so many highlights, and you know, there's enough lowlights as well. But you know, I tend to you know, even having to walk the walk of shame at the Countdown Rock Awards when I was the one left in the left in the building, and they'd all gone, and there was just residue on the stage, and poor old Molly shaking like this, and I had calculated that there was going to be no more awards, right? I thought, yeah, that's it. I hadn't calculated that, and the final award goes to the best artwork. And I remember I was sunk down in the seat, like really. I'm not just joking, because people were looking at me like I was a pariah. Like, how the hell did you allow this band to do this? Because they all assumed, record company people, media people, whoever was around, they just couldn't believe this thing had happened right in front of them. And I remember sinking down in that seat,
People who don't know what happened, they basically smashed up the stage, didn't they?
That's it, exactly. Sorry, there's yeah, why did it happen? I had convinced the band to do Countdown against what they didn't want to do. Countdown. This was in the early days. This was Khe-Sanh came out, and the reason why I convinced the band, or why I was, my point was, I'd seen Jimi Hendrix on Top of the Pops, which was equivalent to Countdown. I'd seen the Sex Pistols on Top of the Pops, and this is a medium. This is a medium that get to 2-3 million people on a Sunday night. In those days, that was it, other than radio, and radio was very pop orientated at that point of time, And so, to me, suddenly if this dirty rock and roll band kind of turns up, it's a complete difference. Is that the contrast is there, Anyway, unfortunately, what happened with Khe-Sanh is that it had been banned by radio. And while we were there in the dressing room, and they were all resigned at that point, okay, we'll do it, sort of thing. In came the one of the main guys at Countdown and sort of said, "Oh, sorry guys, you're going to have to change the lyrics," which is like, what? Which is kind of strange. I often think about it nowadays, because everything used to be mimed in those days, So they must have figured that we were going to have to Jimmy was going to have to either recut the lyrics in another room, so to speak, and then splice them together. To this day, I don't know. They didn't sort of say, "Oh no, you can't go on." They just basically walked in and said, "Oh, you've got to change the lyrics." Well, the door was shut, and the band all looked at me, and one of the voices came back, "I told you so, Rod. I told you that was a bad move." So I then said, "Well, what do you guys want to do?" And they said, "Well, what do you think?" And I go, "Well, I'll back you guys," sort of thing, And I think one of them said, "We shouldn't compromise." And I remember saying, "Yeah, I agree with you. We shouldn't compromise." So the guy came back in and says, "Oh, okay, you're going to do change the lyrics." And we said, "No, sorry," walked out the door. But of course, that was looked on by the record company as like, "Oh God," because they were really fighting hard to get Cold Chisel to actually on Countdown, But years on, suddenly they're the biggest band in the country. And in all honesty, we didn't need Countdown anymore. I'm not trying to discount Countdown, but we didn't need it anymore. But the problem is we're being anointed as the potential being anointed as kings. Here they come, the greatest band in the world, king and queen sort of thing, we were damned if we didn't go on and damned if we did. So we had to find some way of extricating ourselves from the clutches of Countdown as such, even though appreciated, they helped. They sell records. They certainly did over the years. And I love Molly, and I felt regret, but we had to do something to get ourselves out of it as such, And so between the band, myself, and the road crew, we came up with this idea that we would do that. We will do the show, but only do it in a live show, because most of the other acts were just miming to their hits, And so we decided what we would do is that we would do the song live, and we would have a bit of a sting in the tail. And so we went through the sound check and did the song as it is. They were all like, "Oh, the sound." Had Mark Opus was there doing the sound, so it was pristine as such, And And then, of course, everybody files in, and we were winning all the awards. And what we'd agreed upon is that we would not accept, the band would not accept the awards, which they didn't like. But in the end, they kind of, like that, I'm talking about Countdown, accepted it. It was either be myself or the record company would accept the awards. So that was fine. So there was just like, you know, they'd go, I'd go, that kind of thing, you know. You know, we were saying that, you know, the reason was, you know, because we're going to do this live thing at the end, and it's going to be live television, and you don't normally have live TV. It's going to be amazing. You know, the band is actually going to play live. And of course, they're all incredibly excited about it. Of course, the song starts, they get through half of the song, and then they do this breakdown, you know, and basically Jimmy just comes out with this diatribe of, like, you know, we're just against TV Week, because they were one of the what we looked at as a you know, a problem, and yeah, you know, that really in reality TV Week had nothing to do with music. It was just a branding. And then they were television magazine. In fact, I think the only music stuff they had in their magazine was probably a record review or something, you know. Well, they changed the words and then basically smashed up the equipment, and everybody thought that it was the you know, the worst thing. For the next day, everybody thought it was the worst thing that ever happened. And I was being castigated by people saying, kill the band's career. You've killed the band's career. Then all the fans, this is what happened. Suddenly, you know, the great unwashed started sort of rising and saying it's the greatest thing we've ever seen. And then, of course, the record company went, hang on, we got numbers out there. People are going and buying records. Hey, you know, and suddenly they all changed from, what the friggin' hell did you do? You've you know, killed the band's career, to, hey, that was the greatest marketing move I've ever seen. And even, you know, I felt so sorry for Molly. But, you know, years afterwards, you know, people talk about it as one of the great moments, if not the greatest rock moment, you know, Australia.
It's a great story, Rod, and we could talk for hours. There are so many stories in the book, Ringside. Thank you for joining us, and everyone should read this book.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it, buddy.